book if you don't have a copy. Ta-da, there you go. Okay. All right, so put my pages back in order. Thank you for joining us today. This is Wilkinson College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences signature initiative, Engaging the World, Leading the Conversation. Each year, the college selects a key social issue to examine through interdisciplinary, campus-wide conversations intended to promote thoughtful dialogue, mindful reflection, social tolerance, awareness and respect, peace and kindness. Wilkinson is partnering with Crean College of Health and Behavioral Sciences for the 23-24 series, which focuses on health equity. And so that's one of the reasons that we're having Suzanne Edison here as a poet, because she deals with so many health issues in her work. This fall, we will hear and have heard from journalists, healthcare providers, activists, scholars, poets, artists, and filmmakers who are fighting for health equity. They will lead and have already led conversations across the campus to help us understand how historical, cultural, social, and economic disparities impact access to health and healthcare, and what can be done to ensure that everyone can attain the highest level of healthcare, regardless of their disease, gender, race, nationality, or ethnicity. We encourage students interested in exploring these issues past this semester to take a look at the Health Humanities minor housed in Wilkinson College. It went into the catalog only this past year, so it's a brand new area for Wilkinson College, and we're happy to collaborate with the health sciences this year. The next event in the Engaging the World series is a panel on trans health and wellness, which will be taking place in the Cross Cultural Center, which is just upstairs in this building, on Thursday, November 9th at 2:30 p.m. So just 2 days from now. Today's event is also part of the Tabula Poetica series that Logan Estale, one of my colleagues in English, and I piloted in 2009. That makes this year the 15th iteration of Tabula Poetica. Who knew that it would last that long? Turns out poetry is popular. This year's series concludes with the MFA poetry reading on Tuesday, December 12th at 4 p.m. right here in Argyris Forum. No, not right here in Argyris Forum, in Wallace Chapel in Fish All Faith Center, which is a much more beautiful spot for a poetry reading. We'd like to extend special thanks to Karen Wilkinson and Reg Lancaster for their support of Engaging the World. Karen is the daughter of Harmon Wilkinson, the namesake of Wilkinson College. Other sponsors for today's event include the English department and poets and writers. In the English department, I want to thank especially Dr. Linda Hall, who is the department chair, and Julia Ainley, who is sitting here in the first row. Julia handles all the logistics for Tabula Poetica. And when, as you can see, our poet was unable to travel for the events today, Julia coordinated a quick switch so that we can still have live events and gather here to celebrate poetry. Yay, Julia. Thank you. Okay, where am I here? Oh, yes. Whenever you enjoy a literary event, whether it's here at Chapman, elsewhere, make sure you go read more of the poet's work. Buy the book. We gave the book away to a lot of students, and look up the poet's work and what is related to the poet's work, especially in the case of these interdisciplinary kinds of events. Finally, before I introduce the poet, I will say silence your cell phone so we don't get interrupted by that. That's actually why I get to do these introductions, just to have you silence your cell phones. Okay, I wanted to invite Suzanne Edison to campus for a long time. This Tabula Poetica is special because it's connected with Engaging the World. She fits incredibly well with the programming, the larger programming for Engaging the World. And she was supposed to visit Southern California this week anyway. And so I said, oh, you're coming anyway? Your travel is paid for? Come on over. But that didn't turn out to be the case. In the last 48 hours or so, it became unable for us to hold the events with Suzanne here. And I know I'm disappointed, but thrilled that she's here anyway on the screen. And I know she was disappointed not to meet you in person. Skip ahead here. So Suzanne Edison is a therapist and educator, as well as a poet. In connecting wellness and writing, she's worked in all sorts of settings with all sorts of individuals. And I think she'll talk a little bit about that as well as the poems themselves. She understands writing in part as a way to comprehend as well as express experiences, and has shared that approach, especially with those facing chronic illness and their caregivers. Her book, The Body Lives Its Undoing, which is not the one that we distributed to classes. Her book, The Body Lives Its Undoing, is based on interviews with health researchers, healthcare providers, patients, and caregivers, and includes both poems and images. It's an amazing interdisciplinary example of arts-based research and an important exploration of the meanings of autoimmune disease. And if you don't know what arts-based research is, and you are a creative writer, I think that is something you should jot down and Google, because I think that Chapman is a really good place to do arts-based research and connect creative work with other kinds of disciplinary things going on campus. Suzanne Edison's most recent of 4 books is the one we distributed to some students, Since the House is Burning. There, the speakers of poems live in the hyperbole of daily life, where a headline can crack an egg in your face, and we're asked to rate our pain on a scale from 1 to 10. Part of why I'm drawn to these poems is because I am sometimes left off kilter by ringing in my ears, and I sometimes want to hunker down with a friend diagnosed with cancer. But who hasn't had days like the grandmother at the end of On American Violence? Here's the last 2 lines of that poem. She went on knitting in spite of all the stitches she dropped, in spite of the holes. Let me read that again. She went on knitting in spite of all the stitches she dropped, in spite of all the holes. Let's welcome Suzanne Edison.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Julia, for being able to pivot so quickly. This is really exciting that I get to be here. I'm so disappointed that I'm not there in person, I can't tell you. But I'm happy to be here in virtual reality. And with that, I will tell you just a little bit more about myself, and then I will dive into poems, and there'll be some time for prompts as well. I was a psychotherapist for many years. I left that field. I went into another field. I had our child. Actually, we adopted her from Guatemala. And when she was 4.5, she started to show some symptoms that nobody could figure out. And it took us 1.5 years to get a diagnosis of this very rare autoimmune disease called juvenile myositis. At that point, I had to quit my job to take care of her. Thankfully, my husband, who was a teacher, had good health insurance. We were very fortunate, but it was a long haul. And some of the pieces of what I lived with was the anxiety first of not knowing what this illness might be. We thought she might die. She couldn't get up off the floor by herself without pushing herself up. She couldn't tie her shoes. She's 6 years old. She had to pull herself up banister, up the stairs. She had weird skin sensitivities to lots of different clothing and rashes in various parts of her body. So eventually we got the diagnosis and I was relieved. However, I didn't know the years that I would face after that. So some of what I'm going to read to you today is about health, engaging the world in all kinds of healthcare related activities, disparities, research, both my research and what it means to be a research subject. Although I may not get to that poem, we'll see. And then I'm going to read some other poems that are not exactly all healthcare, just because I think we can need a break from time to time. And then I'm going to ask you to, if you have questions at the end, I'd love to, talk a little bit about craft or anything else that comes up, totally up to you. So the first poem I'm going to share with you is not in this book. It is in a earlier book. And so I thought I would share my screen so you could see it. And can everybody see that? Hopefully. Give me a thumbs up. Yes. Okay, thank you. Great. Okay. Only serious applicants need apply. And this was, I did a lot of, once my daughter was diagnosed and we ended up at Seattle Children's Hospital, I wanted to talk with other parents whose kids had the same disease. It was hard to find them because of HIPAA. Eventually, I worked my way around that. And I knew that if I needed support as a therapist, somebody else needed support too. And so I started these support groups for parents who had kids with the same disease, which eventually shifted into a writing and support group for parents who had kids with any sort of ongoing health issue, emotional, mental, physical, et cetera. And not that they're separate, believe me. And so as a part of that, I began to talk with parents about their experiences. And I knew that writing, I had been a poet, but when my daughter got sick, writing poetry was what saved me. I needed it to stay sane, to try to manage the realities of my experience and to try to understand and hold it all in some way, shape, or form. And the poem became a container in that experience. So only serious applicants need apply. In the club you never wanted to join is a job you didn't apply for. Your qualifications dubious. Requirements include multiple personality transformations, nurse, masseuse, psychotherapist, physical and occupational therapist, pharmacist, nutritionist, medical researcher, vice president in charge of all paperwork, insurance nag, professional, wish you knew it all, and hate that you don't. Benefits include seeing the neighbor coming home late, coyotes prowling your urban streets, the moon in all phases, hearing the house creak shift, the newspaper slam against your unlocked door, alley cats mating, a sound not unlike your child crying, which makes the hair on your arm rise. And for the fourth or fifth time, you must check her room, her breathing. Inhale the delicate sleep smell of her, because when you signed up for motherhood, fatherhood, you didn't think it included a future with a child who may not have one. And that's from the book, The Moth-Eaten World, Finishing Line Press. It's a chapbook. Yeah, thank you. You can hold your applause until the end. I appreciate that. You can snap or give me thumbs up. I'm going to read this poem that Anna liked, and I'm reading it. I wrote it during the early years of COVID, and it's very timely since I have just gotten it for the first time, which is why I am not there breathing on you all. It's on page 43 if you have the book and want to follow along. It's called Here Ellipsis. It's written in sections, and the reason it's written in sections and even in different sort of line breaks is because I feel like COVID, this pandemic, has unwound us in ways that we don't even yet completely understand and may not for many years. And we all know what an ellipsis is, right? That 3 dots and the space and whatever happens in between. 1, here a forest where a broken swinging limb houses lichen frost that lives as I do on thin air. 2. Here in this warping shadow, I've lost track of the day's name, overloaded as we are with magnolia coronas, branches petaled, cream and lipstick edged, frothed by the quiet, quickened by lack of traffic. 3. Here, the invisibly viral moves me to virtual voices and visions, the cat chasing its tail, turning and turning. 4. I stand at the window, moon waiting, day waiting, lines at stores, masked figures, the darting fear in black bandana or cupcake patterned paper, masquerades in parks on bicycles, hospital doorways, the surgical theater, not a stage. Is that a stage? Is this a stage? 5. For now, we parents and partners forced to family, fragmented memories of fragrances, chili peppers, rice patties, cedar pollen. What's familiar? I tell my daughter this will pass, though each day seems like 52 card pickup. 6. We have sirens and EMTs perspiring like NASCAR drivers, and the daily droning of probabilities and percentages, of graphs and graspable warnings unheeded, of to-do lists vised and revised and listlessly forgotten, of splits, who and what to trust. 7. We have diameter and distance, our shrunken social circles diametrically opposed to skin and arms, our air and space laden with head-turning viburnum and diesel delivery trucks, of panic and protesters, a scrambled chorus egging up our minds. 8. And we wonder who is essential, expendable. 9. And we watch the baby hummingbird fledge and think, oh, to be aloft. 10. And we call each other saying, how you holding up? How you holding? How you? How? So some of that I think still resonates with us today. So one of the main things about, one of the very subjective things about any illness, anything, is pain, right? It's really hard to categorize. It's something that doctors have decided they are going to put on a scale of 1 to 10, or if you're a child, there are faces that you can see from, very unhappy to happy. And that's supposed to tell them something about what we're feeling or experiencing. But pain of every sort is subjective. And are we talking about physical pain? Are we talking about emotional pain? Are we talking about spiritual pain? So this poem on page 58 is called Pain on a Scale of 1 to 10. And I will just tell you there's a lot of Latinate in here, a lot of Latinate words, because that's what the medical profession often uses. And after interviewing, again, many different kinds of parents and caregivers, in the second section, I'm talking about arthritis. And in the last section, I'm talking about a man who's unhoused. I also worked with a UW nursing professor who teaches nursing students how to treat and care for those living unhoused, and they go out into the streets and help people. Pain on a scale of 1 to 10. Who isn't sick of being Sisyphus, pushing the rock of yourself daily up from the bed? When someone says hypochondriac, all I can think is, give me a shot of adrenaline. Irradiate this burden. No pain, no need to gain. So many tried and failed treatments. I say, give it a name. Call it a filament, spun into tourniquet, anomaly, twisted to penalty, an infestation, scaling my nerves. What about heartache? Multiple strains of arthritis, hers, her child's, the husband leaves. She's a power outage, a walking specter in the disco swirl of daylight. What bandage or antiseptic for her plight? Was there an expiration date for rupture? Pathologic or melancholic or grieving, a trail of gauze. A man says, my pain and I are transient. He's seeking ground, a rock. The war still resides inside, amps up his sugared house, bloody lows and highs, twitchy brood of his eyes. A bilious babble warbles like a bird of necrosis, winged psychosis. His fractured peace begs for measure. Before I go on reading, I would love for you to have a few minutes for a writing prompt. I hope you all have something to write on or with. If you were in the last section, you'll know the prompt because it's the same, so you can add to it as you wish. And I know that Julia has, whoops, I lost that one, sorry. Here we go. So the prompt for today is this. Take a moment to write down the word illness or disease, or differently abled. And this can be emotional, physical, spiritual, whatever comes to you. And this can be about yourself or about someone you care about or have cared for. Make a list of all the images, facts, your sensory awareness, and thoughts that come to you. I'm going to give you 5 minutes. And then use any of these ways to compare the illness and the disease to colors, textures, shapes, sound, sight, taste, smell, plants or other elements of nature. I think you can see this all on the board as well as on the screen. I don't know if you can see the screen, but it should be up there on the board. And then make sure that there's specific, if there are specific words or descriptions that you want to make sure you remember, just circle them. Okay, I'm giving you 5 minutes now on my little timer. take about another minute. And find a resting or stopping place. Thank you. So I'll give you the rest of that prompt at the end. I'm going to move on to talking about, well, reading some more work. In this next poem on page 27, I talk about infusions, and my daughter was on it's called intravenous immunoglobulins, and she would get these infusions in the hematology oncology infusion center at the hospital. There were lots of other kids there, many of them with cancer, and getting chemo treatments as well. And they were supposed to be produced at a certain rate, or if you don't infuse it at a certain rate, you can get these wicked aseptic meningitis headaches. And unfortunately, the doctor put in the wrong order. And when I discovered this after 24 hours, my daughter was in lots of pain. So here's that poem. Still life without skull. The infusions were pulsed too fast, and the doctor admitted her mistake. But the jackhammering in my child's head went on for days, not to be medicated away. I watched my girl writhe on the floor like a worm cut in half, and felt I was a captive in a new infernal circle. And though I can't see or hold death in my arms, it ticks in us. I think of old Dutch paintings, thick with vermilion, pomegranates, overripe grapes blooming from true black. Half-eaten meats house a congregation of flies. Tenacious strings of gristle and lemon peels dangle over the table's edge. Here there is no skull, but the sparrow's eye flickers, a watch chain in its mouth. And I have to say that many doctors will not generally admit their mistake. So I was actually very fortunate to have one who was willing to do that. And I said to her, all I want you to do is to make sure this doesn't happen again to anybody else. So that's where we ended up with that one, and she was still her doctor. If we turn to page 28, this next one is really about the social kinds of ramifications that having a child with a chronic illness can bring when you've had a particular kind of life, social structure, and then it completely changes. And you have to deal with what I consider to be kind of tensions that existed for me as I came to understand what was important and how to deal with it. So this is called teeter-totter. No one wants to talk about the sick child. as we twine the handles of her tricycle with crepe paper, readying for the neighborhood Mayfair parade. Other kids are twisted up in tutus, taping Mylar streamers to their bike seats like race award ribbons. No one wants to stand too close to disease, as if her ballooned face and steroid bloated body are contagious. I feel their corrugated sadness, their apologies of, I didn't know, baited with fear, as the mousetrap of their faces shut. 2 blocks to the playground, and my girl can't keep up. I push her trike with an attached handle like a broom. I'm a witch, sweeping her into the fray, not wanting to be left behind. My fear, not hers. It catches me like an old film strip flapping off its sprockets. I twist between my dissolving family portrait like stick figures on the rear window of a minivan and an unknown future, while I'm flailing in a quarantine of difference. No longer able to hang from monkey bars, my child sidles over to the seesaw, plops down, and teeters toward the ground. I should move, sit on her end, pump us up and down, leave the invisible others dangling in air. This next poem starts on page 35, and it's written in sections, and it's kind of a conversation between kind of the facts and the emotions. And because it's about gun violence, it also reverberates into our public health sphere because for many years, as Anna recently pointed out, I'd forgotten the name of the amendment, but the CDC was prevented from using money to study the effects or research the effects of gun violence on public health. Still an issue. Today, and I misread this headline because I'm just a little foggy, but the Supreme Court will also be considering whether to uphold the ban on guns to domestic violence abusers. Okay, this is a long one. It's called On American Violence. 1. In America, the Milky Boys drink in dark web chatter, crosshair in backlit screens, affirming each other. What unseen desire will exert its force? Easy for them to uncock their disappointments with bullets. I imagine a young man in the basement of a suburban house, his face pixelated and screen frozen. Split him open. One half is hollowed out like an avocado. The other bears the pit. He doesn't know the seed, how it keeps the flesh safe, fresh, how it wants to grow by erupting its hard outer skin. 2. When I want to wound someone, I come out gunning. My barrage of wounds, some masked, others not, are stitched with accusations. To my husband, you didn't listen again. Or maybe I'm like a single action revolver, just one shot, one freighted with a heat-seeking ugly I know will find its soft target. This I won't repeat here. Something in me wants to disappear, my husband. In that moment, blindly, those hurts which he didn't create, for which he is not responsible, I might be destroyed. 3. Will it be the nowhere man who obliterates my Latina daughter shopping for towels at Walmart, or my cousin gossiping with a friend as they exit her synagogue, heading for Chinese food, or my neighbor kneeling on a carpet, head to Mecca, praying to Allah that his DJing son is safe at his job? 4. Even a child can do the math. I'm sure the Milky Men can count their rounds, multiply the numbers needed to maximize damage. The stories they must tell themselves. about the respect they deserve and how everyone will know their name, if only as cowboys in cyberspace. They are too young to know human brains forget more than they remember. 5. The stories I tell my children repeat the names of the teachers who stand near doors while kids hide in lockers. And I recall the strangers on a subway who lunged toward a knife-wielding attacker. Then I think about my grandmother, who every Christmas gave us scarves. She just went on knitting in spite of all the stitches she dropped, in spite of the holes. Something I want to say about this poem is that, and I think most of you as poets will know this, that the I in the poem isn't always the writer and isn't always the actual biographical information. So one is allowed to use one's imagination to bring, as Richard Hugo said, the poem doesn't have to be factual, but it has to be true. You up for a few more? Guys ready for a few more? Okay. All right. This one is on page 66. And again, I was talking about the oncology center, hematology oncology center at the hospital, the infusion center. And so I witnessed a lot of, or I overheard a lot of conversations, but I also understood, and through my own relationship with my spouse, that men and women experience their child's illness differently, and that can provoke tension in a marriage, in a relationship of any sort, any kind of caregiving relationship. And and I think words are, again, an important piece of how we try to understand things. And this one is called Lines Drawn. Again, in their son's brain, the tumor is still growing. Both agree the hair is shaven and the slice at the skull was needed. But they argue. The woman says, it's a seam. The man says, a weld. The woman rips out threads from her sampler, repairing the motto, there's no place like harm, and says, it's stitched. The man paces, glances at the soundless TV, a home show the boy is not watching. It's stapled, not natural, he says. In the oncology treatment room, unlike astronomers who can't see dark matter, although I know we're starting to see dark matter, yet study its effects, they both see the clear patch holding his IV needle in place. They see his eyelids sheer and veined like blinds draping a waning window. And the boy, he is wondering if his parents like dogs, if they will adopt one from the pound or wait for a puppy. He hopes the dog will love sticks, jump for them in midair. He thinks he'd like to be that stick, thrown and returned over and over. What else will they do when he is dead? He hears his mother say, his hair will grow back. Hears his father say, I need to spackle the hole I kicked in his bedroom wall. So while I didn't ask a child if they thought they were going to die, I have heard from parents who have kids with cancer have said that their children have told them that. And they want to be clear about it. Okay, page 73. This is the title of the book that Anna referenced earlier, The Body Lives Its Undoing, the collaborative project that I did with researchers and doctors and caregivers and patients, visual art and poetry. I did a series of 28 interviews. I wrote grants to do this project. I talked with people at this research institute called the Benaroya Research Institute in Seattle, one of the premier research programs in the country, in the world. And they study a variety of different autoimmune diseases. And they were thrilled to have someone come and do an art-related project because they were hoping to always be able to tell the story. So one of the particularly interesting, one of the researchers who's big data, she was a big data person. She has a painting in the book, which I'm sorry you don't have but to see, but you can. She talked about, when I've heard her do presentations, she says, I want this data to tell a story. So then she goes into what's the story. Again, this is listening to lots of different people who had autoimmune diseases. We videoed and audio recorded those interviews. I asked for permission slips to be signed so that I could use their words, and that I would be writing poems based on my interviews with them. They would also have the opportunity to disavow anything if it was super personal. Everybody that I talked to was very excited to participate in this project. There are two words you'll see in the beginning. The first one is also the name of a movie. It's a Hopi word, Koyaanisqatsi. You may be too young to have ever seen it. If you get a chance, go out and look for it. And then an Inuit one, which is also in language that I have read about. I spent some time in the Arctic, so I've read it in other books as well. The body lives its undoing. Like that Hopi word, Koyaanisqatsi, life out of balance, or the Inuit one, Uganiaktuk, to behave strangely. My body is in self-arrest, the victim, perpetrator, jailer. I am a heaving glacier, clattering, tending to cacophony. I am the kinglet droves, giving way to a swelter of crows. I could be the roughened rumble of cells awry, one gene or more, scratching out a mixtape of chaos. Because the mayor of my body handed over the keys to invaders, I'm cascading through flames, joints and muscles dragging, like a loose muffler on asphalt, fighting off one illness, then another. I am not unlike the polar bears stranded on shrinking ice, chuffing and growling alarms, while out of melting permafrost, a viral storm rises. I want to know how to be this turbulent sea, a solo boat, listing, and a sailor, my hand on the tiller. A couple of things about that poem. Kinglets are these little tiny birds that fly around in these droves. And I wrote this poem before COVID. And there were already in the melting permafrost viruses that were starting to emerge that had been frozen into the ice for many years. So timely or untimely, I'm not really sure. Okay, how about two more? Page 82. This is the two poem warning. This is, I call it fevers. It's a different kind of fever. It's not so much about healthcare per se. Fevers. Walking. I thought the threadbare moon cold and restless. Your head could not contain your hands. Branches pine, sag, and you worry about trees, the way leaves sheet the light, our bodies, parallel seductions, thoughts coded in disguise. We want emulsion, a fevered slash, vinegar, oil, dash of water. Knowing excitement lacks certainty. I try to kiss your mouth open to the rain. Somewhere dogs tied to a fence, howling, not my breath. We skirt a bench. I scoop up a stone. Simple object, not dressed in scaffolds. Sycamores straddle a wavering walk. Time is always giving us the slip. My heart drunk in your pocket. We could break. I will read one more. And I kind of wanted to leave you on an up note. I can find it in this book. Oh, here it is. Yeah. Page 30. So my daughter is now 23. She went into remission off medication. There's no cure for this disease, but she was able to get off her medications and has been in remission for 9 years. When she turned 18, she decided to get a tattoo, and she didn't want to tell me what the tattoo was. She clearly had it in her mind. We had talked about tattoos and whether and making sure that the place she was going had good sterilization and needles and non-toxic inks, etc. That was the mother in me, of course. She's like, yeah, okay. And she did it. And she went with a friend. And then she texted me a picture of the tattoo. After remission, her first tattoo. It wasn't the needles or punctured skin, rat-a-tat-tat and repeat, that surprised me. She'd had years of infusions. It wasn't the ink, like an ant trail of dark blood, nothing we hadn't both seen in the vials siphoned monthly, like crude oil from shale that often sputtered or refused to flow. It was the location she chose, familiar bench of her left inner arm, exposed and soft as morning haze, where once tubes were tied above her bulbous vein. And the image in Roman numerals, their heft like those carved on a tombstone, engraved on a sundial or gold coin, a code one must decipher, something a future lover will rub his finger over or kiss. The tattoo inscribed today marks an expiration to the platoons of bottles, pills, lined up dutiful as soldiers. Marks 4 years since the gnat swarm of her rash and weakness finally lay dormant like larvae in winter. And my gift is forgetting the phlebotomist's name that I once knew by heart. Thank you. Before we take questions, or I take questions, thank you. Thank you. You have something, Anna?
Are you able to hear from back here?
Yes.
Okay, so anyone who has a question, I think the microphone is attached to the camera, and so it's easier to hear if you're projecting this way than from the podium. So who has a question?
Oops. Somebody went in front of the camera.
I know many of you wrote about a particular poem. Got any questions about a particular poem?
I wanted to say for you to go back to your prompt now that you've heard a lot of the poems that I've read and see if there's anything you want to add to your list of words or ideas. And also, in the last section, Anthony asked me a question which I didn't answer fully. So I'm going to answer his question again. He asked about disordering because I said that the premise of, hey, Do you want to ask it again?
Oh, sure. Let me bring it up. Yeah, so I was kind of just asking about kind of rebuilding the self after the disillusion of parts of the self that happens within the act of caretaking.
Thank you. And so I answered that one of the things that happens as both someone who has the illness, but also the caregiver, is that there is this disordering, a dismembering, a dissolution of the self, and you have to find ways to bring it back together. And partly writing the poems was a way for me to pull myself back together, because I could then begin to see on the page as I was writing what I was feeling and thinking. And it led me then to researching, it led me to talking to other people, it led me to getting support, to getting therapy, to being able to grieve and deal with the losses and the new ideas and the new realities that were coming towards me. And I think you could hear in the Teeter-Totter poem how I had to really shift my whole perspective about what it meant to be a family and what it meant to have social connections in the community. And then there's all the issues around having a job and having to leave the job, and how do you reconstitute yourself in the world as a working human being. And I was very, very lucky that I could pivot and make this reality happen, to take my experience and try to make it better for other people. So that was a way of, I think, giving back and advocating for my daughter in her disease. I've been working for this organization called CureJM for 17 years. I'm now the mental health coordinator, and I have been training doctors in how to integrate mental health. I'm getting doctors to train each other about how to integrate mental health into pediatric rheumatology. So I feel like I'm really reinventing myself for like the third or fourth time in the world. So I want to say to all of you, it is possible, and it is important that you do that it's important to fall apart, and it's important to find the ways back together. And it is not a shame to ask for help, and it is not a shame to fall apart. So that's my little response that I didn't give fully the first time.
There are questions?
Yeah, I was wondering, you were talking a lot about the creative projects that you undertook with people in medical spaces, with patients and doctors and such. Do you know of, are you involved in any projects, or do you know of any projects like that that are still happening within those spaces?
That is a good question. I recently did a new book is coming out. We did a new project. Again, like I got a small grant for this. It wasn't in the I actually, it's been a very, very hard time in the medical sphere to get these projects underway. And I think it's not because of the doctors per se, but it's because COVID has shifted our willingness to go out into the world, into the community, to be in spaces, particularly with people who are immunocompromised in any way, shape, or form. And to be willing to connect in that way. So I tried to provide these workshops at various and sundry public health space, another clinic that sees low income and ethnic minority patients and families, that's connected to Seattle Children's Hospital, and also at Seattle Children's Hospital. So the doctors were all willing, but we could not get people there. And finally, the place that I finally connected with, this was the last year, was the Arthritis Foundation in Seattle. They have a large chapter. They have a large community support group. I had done a workshop at one of the arthritis camps a few years ago. One or two of the parents knew me from that workshop. And also, one of the parents I had talked to originally long ago at Seattle Children's Hospital, and she said recently, I was the first person that had ever asked her how she was doing as a caregiver, which was sad, but I'm glad that that worked for her. I mean, I'm glad that I was able to do that. And then, so the Arthritis Foundation provided this wonderful group of families. We did a writing workshop for the whole family, for caregivers, for patients, siblings. I did the writing prompt, and then my collaborator, who's a visual artist, had them make masks superhero masks. And I know this is not quite answering your question, but that will be a new book coming out, a little booklet called Dear Arthritis, A Conversation in Writing and Art. As far as I know at this point, besides medical humanities programs in medical schools, there have been in the past a few places that will do these like residencies for artists in medical school. So that's what I would suggest looking for. I am not aware of them currently. I know that obviously Anna and Chapman has a medical humanities sort of focus. Florida State University has a medical humanities program. The University of California, San Francisco has a medical humanities program. And I have been working with the University of California, San Francisco, chronic illness. Oh, it's not called the Chronic Illness Center again, where it's called the Wellness Center for those living with chronic illnesses. It's a pediatric wellness center. And I teach writing workshops again for caregivers. And they do a whole bunch of other programming. In the pediatric realm is going to be much more open to it than the adult world. Just will tell you that. So if you have an inclination, go find actually even UC Irvine when I don't know if you know, my daughter went to Chapman for about a semester before COVID hit, and then she came back to Seattle and ended up transferring here. But there's a UC Irvine has a medical campus, Children's Hospital of Orange, right? And there's a great little pediatric center there, and I would suggest going to talk with them. Pediatric rheumatology division is very open to hearing about new and interesting things. I've worked with one of the doctors there.
And do you have a sense of why the pediatric centers are more open than adult?
I think anyone who goes into pediatrics tends to be more playful from the beginning and tends to be more open to a variety of approaches, at least on the coasts. That's been my experience. I lived on the East Coast for a while as well. And I worked in psychiatric hospitals and the University of Maryland Hospital, and I did a lot of movement work with kids. So I think that at this point, you know, they have art therapy in major hospitals, they have play therapy, they have music therapy. So I think pediatrics is just way more open to alternative healing options.
Other questions? I have a question on behalf of the MFA students who may be doing a poetry thesis at some point. How did you organize this book? Were there poems that could have fit that you left out? Did you write poems specifically for this book once you knew you were working on a book? How does a book length collect?
People are writing books about how to put books together at this point. So, I mean, I think there's 100 different ways and everybody's different. I knew that after the Body Lives Its Undoing, which was the, it's hard to see it because I have a background filter, that I didn't want it to be all about illness and healing. And I wanted to be able to incorporate other poems into it, and there's some political pieces, and there's some, you know, pieces about our environment, because the title, Since the House is Burning, is really about all of the ways that our democracy and our world, physical world and our bodies are burning. So there's a poem in there that has this, since the house is burning. It's an Italian adage that my father-in-law used to say, since the house is burning, let us warm ourselves. So I knew that I didn't want the poems about illness and healing all together, like just everywhere. And I wanted to be able to intersperse them with other pieces. I sent the manuscript around several times. Obviously, it got rejected many times. Finally, someone said, I'd love to publish it, Moonpath Press. She said, do you have any more poems? I said, well, okay. So I sent her 4 more poems. And actually, those were the 2 COVID poems and 2 other poems she wanted to include in there. I knew that I wanted to start and end on high notes somewhat. So the beginning poem is about a love poem, and the ending poem is also a kind of love poem, but it's about endings, what happens after I die. But leaving you on a little bit of an up note. And I wanted to weave some moments of uplift into what I think is generally a fairly heavy book. So that's my, I'm not very good at explaining how the arc came about. Somebody else asked me about it, and I trusted my editor tremendously. So the original manuscript order that I sent it in, she reordered. And I have to say that I was perfectly happy with that. And there were one or two poems that I kind of revised, and I didn't really add into it poems. I didn't write into it poems that hadn't already been written somewhere. I just added to them from ones that I already had.
That was super helpful to think about the options.
Yeah.
Great, question? Sure.
Oh, okay. Please, can you read the poem on page 39, and if there is like a particular prompt that inspired that poem?
At page 39.
Yeah, he wants to hear, Koiku wants to hear you read the poem on page 39 and was wondering whether it came from a prompt or what the instigation of that poem was.
Thank you for that question. It came, it's not a prompt. I'm trying to think of what it was. It's not Amnesty International. It might have been Amnesty International. I get these brochures. No, it was Doctors Without Borders. I get their newsletter, Doctors Without Borders. I donate to them. I believe strongly in them. And I got this newsletter, and it had these enormous photographs and images in it that just took my breath away, and I couldn't stop looking at it. And so I had to write this poem. A newsletter. I almost throw it away as if I already know, don't want to hold in my hands the child's face, beaded with sweat and blown up so close, the size of my spread fingers, or touch the Liberian woman, once sick with Ebola, whose eye refuses the camera's direct gaze. She adds her painted palm to the clinic wall of survivor prints. I think of my month-old baby's hands and feet, the ones I inked and pressed to paper. The prints of this woman's baby will never be there. But here is a Palestinian father of 12, his land annexed by Israel. The olive trees he once harvested were burned. Without work, hands atrophy. They forget seasons, repetition being the typesetter of memory. The caption says the farmer is in therapy. Absent olives, he picks only skin on his calloused fingers. Somewhere between the seeing and the saying, there are universes faces stare into and away from, testifying without simile. In the newsletter's center, the quiet envelope lies like folded hands. And because we are in the middle of a new Palestinian-Israeli war, I just want to say that I am not taking sides, that there's pain and grief and horror on both sides, because it's such a politically heavy issue. Thank you for that question.
Your question?
I had a question. I just wanted to ask you that I've seen, like on page 35, I love this poem. on American violence. Some of the stanzas on the right, some on the left, and then there are certain poems where you spaced out the words. Was it your call, or was it the editor's choice, or the structuring of a poem, or keeping these stanzas in a certain way?
I didn't hear the last piece of that, sorry.
Was it your call or the editor's choice to construct these stanzas or the poems in a certain way?
Yes, it was my choice to construct it this way. And sometimes you just have to go on intuition, you know, try a variety of different forms and see what comes. And I think we're so used to the left side, justified on the left, that I wanted to shake it up a little bit because I think that violence shakes it up a lot. And so that was part of why I chose to kind of go back and forth between the two, because we're always being rattled back and forth as well. And I think I tried to I think I said earlier, I was trying to do the left justified was more about the internal kind of emotional aspects. And the left justified was more, sorry, I'm backwards. The left justified was more the emotional, and the right justified was more kind of more factual. And the spaces, you know, I think as writers, you know that space and where you end a line and how you jam a line are all about how you control the reader's experience and their breath. The breath that controls the experience as well. So finding ways to give space and, of course, having one word, like on page 36, the word damage stands out pretty heavily. It may be a heavy hand. Would I think about redoing that? I might think about redoing that.
Actually, could you say a little bit more about revision? And you said, you know, would I redo that even now that it's published? You think maybe I would. But also you said try out a bunch of different forms to see what works. Can you talk your revision process and whether any of the poems just came to you pretty much as they are in the book?
Well, I think Still Life is a sonnet, Still Life Without Skull, sonnet form, sort of 14 lines. I don't generally write 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I take it back. It's not. It's not a sonnet form. I have written sonnets. Like on page 75, if you look at that poem, Shipping Remains, there's lots of spaces. There's a lot of movement back and forth. And that was very deliberate in terms of wanting, again, to give space to these ideas. And it was almost like I needed to give the space as I was writing it to my own ideas as it was coming out. So, you know, I think it's really important. I have a hard time, but I'm getting better at it. Taking a poem, you know, I write it down, and sometimes it just comes to me in this crazy form, like this, the one Shipping Remains. And other times it comes to me, it has to be in these paragraphs. And sometimes the paragraphs, it becomes really clear that it's too much packed into one space. So then I'll try to space it out, you know, allowing the reader to have more time to feel and to think into it. The poem, Oh America, on page 52, I think I tried that in, again, more dense paragraph form, and then it just seemed like it had to come out much more like song lyrics, almost, because it was based on this song. And then I would set apart those lyrics to some extent that I felt wanted to be like a refrain, oh beautiful, or a freedom beat. And the others got housed within the stanza itself, in Liberating Strife and Purple Mountain's Majesties. Coronavirus on page 46 is in couplets. And the reason it was in couplets, I think now, is because it was really about a relationship. And I think couplets lend themselves to relationships very well. Here, ellipsis, the one I read to you, I don't know. I think that one evolved over time. So when you get to stanza 4 or section 4, it felt to me like, again, those experiences of waiting and waiting had to have space around them too, because that was what we were doing. And when the headlines that crack an egg in your face on page 38, I think that was all one poem in one whole stanza, one whole at one time. And then it just seemed like I needed to break it up. And don't ask me why. And the newsletter one, again, was a relationship about me looking at these pictures of people. So it felt like the couplet form was right. Again, I just play around until it kind of feels right. And the teeter-totter poem that I read to you was actually much shorter. In its first version, I think it was only 3 stanzas and much shorter. And I was working with a poet mentor, and she said, you might want to consider filling this out more. So then I had to go back in and rethink a lot of what I was trying to say that might open up the reality to other people. Does that answer your question?
I think so. Let's end with the question that would send students away with some information that they can apply to their own life. So is there anything that you're reading currently that you would recommend, or any poet you would recommend for the student writers to go off and read? Or is there something that you wish someone had told you about the writing life when you were a student, when you were beginning your career?
I think the hardest part I was an older student when I went back to grad school, and I'd had several lives. I would say, don't be afraid to go out and live your life. In addition to being a writer, make time for your writing, but also live life in the world, because I think it feeds you in ways, it feeds your work really deeply. And the other thing I think it's hard is everybody wants to get published, and that can be so depressing and a rat race. And it really is about the numbers, and Submittable has made every journal's life hell. I think every reader journal's life hell. So, and I also was a reader for a journal for a long time. Well, for a short time actually, but I really appreciate how hard it is. I think if you don't enjoy what you're doing as a writer, then don't do it. Don't do it for the accolades, don't do it for the publications, because they're very few and far between. But if you're persistent and it's important, and you feel like you have something to say, well, even if you don't feel like you have something to say, but you're doing it because you love it, most likely it's going to resonate with other people. And, find those 1 or 2. This was advice that, what's his name? A very well-known poet gave to me a long time ago. He's no longer alive. He said, every poet needs 3 readers. 2 of them are probably your family, and that 3rd reader is the one who's going to give you the best advice. So you want to have a support group, but you also want to have a group who tells you the truth. Maybe it's just one other person who reads your work and really gives you the truth of what you're doing and doesn't always praise everything, because we don't grow from that. And I'm reading A God in the House, Poets Writing About Faith, which is mostly about essays. And then at the end of each essay of each poet, there's a poem, which I'm finding very useful to me at the moment. And I've been reading some books that people haven't introduced me to before. Bad Hobby by Kathy Fagan is just a wonderful book, really wonderful book. And Catherine Barnett's Human Hours, Is that it? I think that's the title. Both of them just incredible books. And yeah, I would say check those out. And it's not Sophia. There's a Middle Eastern woman who is she's Algernon. I'll have to find it and I'll send it to Anna. And she writes a lot about female genital mutilation, unfortunately, but it's a great, it's a difficult topic, but she does a really good job, I think, of writing about it. And you know, I'm trying to read. I'm not someone who shies away from difficult subject matter, so do what you can tolerate. I mean, I think there's this whole need to be careful about with each other so that we don't really injure each other, but you get to choose what you read. You don't have to read things you cannot read.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your time.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. And oh, the last piece of the prompt, is it on the board up there? About the 9 lines and everything? Okay, so take the last piece of the prompt away with you. Thank you, Kathy. I don't know who you are, but I appreciate you being there on the screen. And it's lovely to have another face to look at, and Julia's face too. And all of you in the audience. And email me. My email, Anna has my email. I have a website, www.seedison, SEEDISON.com. There's poems on there. There's some essays I've written. You can contact me that way as well.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now
Much
I-
appreciated.
Thank you. And there's still a whole bunch of